All right, guys. Welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We're in Luke chapter 16. Um, Remember, Jesus is giving a series of he's given a series of parables in response to the Pharisees' criticism of him entertaining or receiving sinners. Okay, and so again, all of these chapters, all of these parables in chapters 15, in all of the parables in 15 and 16, and we will see in the beginning of 17. If this is Jesus' response, this is how he is responding to um, 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 again, their hypocritical. What I want, let's go to, let's share my screen. Here we go. So let me go back because I want to just to share the oh where what so you can understand the thought, the whole thought of what Jesus is saying here. Uh, he says, verse 15 says, chapter 15, verse 1 says, all the tax collectors and sinners were approaching to listen to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes were complaining. This man welcomes sinners and eats with him. So this is again. So this is their response. They were complaining because people were listening to Jesus. They were jealous of Jesus, and they were, uh, and more's going to come out. He's going to kind of bust them out. And just so we remember now, the Pharisees were, um, the Pharisees were the religious group. So what what this is too, as we look at it today, and as Jesus has been throughout the whole gospel, man's religion, which includes, but not limited to, every denomination in Christianity within Christianity, every single one of them. And everything you see Jesus kind of pushing back against is the hypocrisy of religion. All right, verse 16 said, he also said to his disciples, so he's continuing his thoughts. I'd say that because remember, chapter headings and verses are not inspired. So when we talk about the inspired word, they're not inspired. Neither are red letter editions. So when you look at red letter editions, that's Bible publishers who put that in. Translators put centuries ago the chapter headings and the verses. And I do say that you should learn to read the Bible absent them. They're great for Bible reference, finding scriptures, if you want to go to John 3:16, it's great to go. Remember in Luke 4, when Jesus was given the scroll, he had to unroll this scroll and find the place in Isaiah. Well, we have a quicker way of finding that. So that's the benefit of it. However, they break up the thought. They break up the flow of thought. So like, for example, see, we think here, if we say, well, chapter 16, now because of our study, we stopped at the end of chapter 15, and then now we're starting verse 1 and 16. However, remember, this is the same thought. That's why I went back and read, in the beginning of where the thought is, so that you can understand, so you can kind of absorb. This is what he's responding to. Okay, so it says right here, and he also said to his disciples, there was a rich man who received an accusation that his manager was squandering his possessions. So he called the manager in and asked, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you are no longer because you can no longer be my manager." Now, remember, this was against the Pharisees. Later, Jesus is going to state that they were covetous, they were adulterers, and yet they had a facade of piety. They had the facade, the outward, the holy men. When you saw them, if you lived during that time, that's what you would have said. You would have said, "These are holy men." Just like today, when you turn on your television and you see how some of these preachers, you go, "Oh, those are holy men." This is what Jesus is referring to here. The Pharisees, because they sit in the chair, then this is how Jesus responded to them. In reality, they were Roman puppets. But they were pious. The Pharisees were pious. They were students of the Mosaic law. They, in some cases, they could cite most, if not the entire Old Testament law, probably Deuteronomy. When people say that, it's usually referring to Deuteronomy, not all 6:13. Now, some might be able to. They were just that. They were just that zealous for the law. But at the same time, their hearts did not reflect that. So here's the parable about a manager, and this is how God would look at them, that they have the care of the Israelites, and look how they were treating. And if you stop and you think about how you put this together with Jesus' response, they were criticizing people who were actually coming to Jesus and being taught, listening to him, and instead of rejoicing. Besides the fact that they were not doing that, the fact that they were not reaching out to the sinners. They didn't want to have anything to do with the sinners. What would you do? This is just a question right here in your church. If a trans person came into your congregation, just throwing that out there, how would you feel? Would you be, ooh? Okay. If a trans person took the time to come to church, now I'm not, if they just took the time to come to church, what would you do? See? All right. Verse 3. Then the manager said to himself, "What should I do, since my master is taking the management away from me?" By the way, in a real-time scenario, in about 40 years, this is going to actually happen to Israel. He says, "I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I'm removed from management, people will welcome me into their home." Now let's stop for a moment here. Notice the strategy that he is saying right here. And by the way, and what Jesus is kind of telling them is that the very people that would help you, and as I said, in about 40 years, you're going to see that Israel falls, Jerusalem falls. But the very people that will help you are the ones that you are despising. Verse 5. So he summoned each one of his master's debtors. "How much do you owe my master?" he asked. The first one, 100 measures of olive oil, he said. "Take your invoice," he told him. "Sit down quickly and write 50. Next, he asked another, "How much do you owe?" 100 measures of wheat, he said. "Take your invoice," he told him, "and write 80. Now, what's kind of interesting about this probably is that he probably was overflating prices anyway. Verse 8, the master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted astutely. But the sons of this age are more astute than the sons of light in dealing with their own people. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous money, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings." He said, "Whoever is faithful in very little is also unrighteous in much." So if you have not been faithful with the unrighteous money, who would trust to you what is genuine? And if you have not been faithful in what belongs to someone else, who would give you what is your own? No household slave can be the slave of two masters, since he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot be slave to both God and money. Then he says, then the Pharisees, watch this, who were lovers of money. So again, this is what he said. They were lovers of money. This is who he is chastising, right? They were lovers. Now again, remember, you wouldn't have saw that with their religious robe and garb and the head covering and all that kind of stuff. So the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and scoffing at him. And he told them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your heart. For what is highly admired by people is revolting in God's sight. A lot of people do that. They know how to, excuse me, people know how to fake in front of people. People have a low bar when it comes to value. Excuse me. People have a low bar when it comes to value. When it comes to things that God would see valuable. It doesn't take much. Just look at our current political scheme. Look at how religious leaders today, how they interact in the arena of politics with certain political figures. Verse 16 says, the law and the prophets were until John. Since then, the good news of the kingdom has been proclaimed, and everyone strongly urges into it. But it is easy for heaven and earth to pass away than for one stroke of a letter in the law to drop out. Now, he's getting ready to drop a bombshell. Okay, so think about this. Remember, he's talking about them. His thought changed when he said they're lovers of money. And then he said, God knows your heart. I wanted to say this before I forget. You know how people say, God knows my heart. Well, that might be one of the most indicting things you could say. Because yes, he does know your heart. The best thing you could say is mercy. Mercy, Lord. Okay, mercy, Lord. We have a wonderful passage that's going to come up later on. Now, he says the law and the prophets. Now, for those students of prophecy, notice this. The law and the prophets were unto John. And since then, the good news of the kingdom has been proclaimed. Now, John the Baptist was the last Old Testament prophet. So when you go back in the Old Testament in the section of the writing of the prophets, and as our Bible arranges the prophetic writings, they arrange it in what is called minor and major prophets. That's not, God never did that, but that's how, again, how they arrange it. If you really wanted to be more accurate, you would arrange it from a chronological order, which would mean you would probably start with, not Joel. Hold on, let me get this straight here. You would probably start the Old Testament writings. It would probably go something like this: Hosea, Joel, and then Amos. Okay, let me see here. I don't know what's going on here. All right. My computer has been acting real funny lately. I don't know if it's this particular program or not. But I will see. Okay. Yeah. Like I said, I don't know what's going on here. All right. So, but from a time thing, you would probably start with Hosea, and then Joel, and then Amos. I want to say Obadiah, then Jonah, and then you would hit around, at that time you hit Isaiah. and then you would hit a couple of other ones. I forgot the timeline of them. Then you would hit, like you say, Isaiah, then Jeremiah, and then Ezekiel, Lamentation in Ezekiel, and then Ezekiel and Daniel at the same time. And then the last three books of the Old Testament writings would be Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Okay, so that's the, the writing of the prophets. Now, then you see that there were no recording prophecies from Malachi to John the Baptist, and that's why when you see the stories about John the Baptist, he comes along and he says, the word of the Lord came to John the Baptist. Now he's the last, again, Old Testament prophet. Okay. Verse 18 says, everyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery. And everyone who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. Now, I asked the question in my title here. Jesus defines kind of the marriage and divorce, or opposed really the creation divorce and remarriage. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into this. I've dealt with it before, but a lot of people, unfortunately, and I have to say a lot, that justifies their divorce. And that's from a Christian, and I'm talking about from a Christian perspective now. So I'm not talking about just secular and all that. Secular, there's a whole nother issue there. But there are the people that within the church. So let me just say this. Between two believers, there's no divorce. God does not justify, God does not give divorce. And notice what Jesus is saying right here. Everyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery. Now the law says, under the law, it says for the exception is adultery. In other words, if your spouse commits adultery, under the law of Moses, that was justification for adultery. And Jesus said that was given because of the hardness of your heart. When we come to the New Testament, and I'll refer you to 1 Corinthians chapter 7, I'll refer you to what everybody goes back to Genesis, and as Jesus is speaking here, notice he says, everyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery, and everyone who marries a divorced woman, a woman divorced from her husband, commits adultery. So in other words, there are a lot of adulterers in the church today. I'm sorry. You have to argue here with Jesus. Now, I've had people who tried to argue with me. I've had people who tried to, unfortunately, and sadly, I've had people who tried to justify divorcing their spouse. Now, they're the one brother, a dear brother of mine, who divorced his wife. And here's the sad thing about this. He divorced his wife. Now, he's, now, he was trying to tell me why he divorced his wife. He was saying, well, she fell away from the Lord, and she, was out in the world. I guess she was out there, had a little wild streak. She was out. So he divorced her. And then he married somebody else. And here's the interesting thing. From what I could see, he married a good woman. However, is that marriage accepted before God? Notice what he says right here. Everyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery. So then to his wife, that would be, and everyone who marries a divorced person. So now when she married the brother, knowing that he was divorced, now she entered into that adultery. Now here's the interesting thing. Here's the sad thing. His first wife has since recommitted her life to the Lord. And this would be sometime after, I guess, he got married. And that's the interesting thing. So how do you deal with that? And here's the harsh thing. The harshness of it is that what Jesus is saying here, it doesn't change what Jesus said. It doesn't change the truth. That everyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery. And everyone who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. That's like I said, y'all can do with that what you will. All right, guys. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. And I will see you in the next study.